Firstly, whoever wins next week's election will have an in tray full of some of the most complex issues of our time. War in the Middle East, war in Eastern Europe, political uncertainty in France this weekend. Whatever happens in the extraordinary race for the White House in November will also surely be a top priority for the occupant of number 10. Somebody who knows all of those complexities better than most is Thomas Pickering, former US ambassador to Israel, Russia, and the UN. And Thomas joins us on Times Radio tonight. Hello, Thomas.
Oh, nice to be with you.
A real pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us. Boy, oh boy, I've got so much to ask you, and we've got so much to journey through. I wonder if we should start with some of those conflicts, areas that you know very well, of course, having been the US ambassador to Israel and Russia. Let's start in Ukraine, if we can. Where do you, Thomas, feel like we are on the timeline of that conflict?
We are in a situation that can best be called stalemate. We are not yet in what one would call a convincing stalemate, which will lead the parties to believe that it is better to get around the table and negotiate an outcome for their interests than to try to continue to use military force to win the conflict. Although President Zelensky has begun a process, he says, of looking at how and in what way he would frame a peace settlement agreement. We will wait and see. Much has been said on this conflict of optimism about winning, but nothing has been shown up on the ground yet that can give anyone, I think, of good conscience, any kind of a convincing evidence that that is near to the case. And Putin, whom I happen to know, is a very hardline player, and Zelensky giving up in advance on a negotiating position would himself face real problems in his domestic political situation.
And as you say, you know Putin. What is he thinking now?
Putin is continuing to think what he has thought all along, that what is good for him in the Ukraine war is something that looks like he can bring off a military victory or a win. He has for years been basing his foreign and security policy on appealing to Russian hardliners and to people who in one way or another will support him, because tough and very intrusive and very warlike decisions are the kinds of thing that will keep him in power and the opposition away from taking over.
Right. On that note then, Thomas, have Western sanctions designed to squeeze Russia hard, designed perhaps in many ways to put those people who are with him in the Kremlin at odds with him, right? Have they failed?
So far they have. We're 3 years in, and if you see any signs of impending change as a result of sanctions, you've got better eyesight than I have.
What would a Trump presidency mean for Ukraine?
I think the Trump presidency would mean total unpredictability, a certain penchant to kiss up to Putin in one way or another, which is not good for Ukraine. It's not good for Europe. It's not good for world security. And it's not good for the US.
Is there a possibility? I mean, people talked only a lot about, we've talked a lot this week about the administration rather than the man. Is there a possibility that there will be people around Donald Trump or part of that machine who perhaps think and feel differently, sending him on a different path?
The answer to that was given in 2016 and 2017, when the Dreamers and the pro-Trumpers pushed that line. You know what happened in history. I don't have to rehearse it for you. It never worked.
I see. Let's turn our attention, excuse me, to the Middle East. I'll ask you the same question. Where do you feel we are on the timeline of that conflict in Gaza?
Not anywhere near yet having President Biden's plan, which I think is a good plan, brought to an acceptable position. And in part, the debate over the last couple of days has not strengthened Biden's plan to support an approach which is more balanced and more respectful of both the Palestinians and the Israelis with respect to their future. He is, in many ways, at this particular time, seeking to regain credibility and to some extent, both pro-Israeli donors and pro-Israeli voters are people that he feels he must please and count on to, in effect, maintain the balance that he had lost as a result of Thursday night.
And we'll come back to that as well in a moment, Thomas. What a fascinating moment of history that was. Just so far as Israel is concerned, if you were still ambassador to Israel and you had a chance for a word in Benjamin Netanyahu's ear tonight, what would you tell him?
I would tell him it's time he began to think of his country's long-term interest. What he has done in Gaza, in many ways unfairly and in horrible context promoted by Hamas, has left him in a situation where everything he is doing is creating greater separation from Israel and the states around the world which have traditionally supported Israel because of its their deep sense that Israel is committed to international law and the promotion of ethnic principles, something that 38,000 dead Palestinians and 88,000 wounded is not a harbinger or indeed evidence of. And so he is, in that sense, I hope, moving in a direction which will right that position, but I do not see it. In a sense, he and President Trump and President Putin share some common view that in order to continue to stay in office, and in some cases out of jail or out of deep trouble, they have to win this election at all costs. And at all costs means taking graver risks rather than dealing what I would call in a strategic and intelligent way about how to negotiate an answer to the problem at hand. No negotiation delivers 100% of everything, but no military use of force, as we have seen over the last years, does anything closer than that.
Do you think do you feel this conflict ends in a two-state solution?
Absolutely. I have spent many, many years in the region. I was also ambassador to Jordan, an Arab country. My view is that the only fair and equitable solution is a two-state solution. The only thing wrong with a two-state solution, each side has to give in order to get. And they're not yet ready to do that. And they're not yet ready to command what I would call the attention and support of their voting public to move in that direction. And the US is heavily dependent on the support of their sympathizers to win an election here. And so it is in an increasingly complex, indeed distorting situation where domestic politics and foreign policy issues are deeply entwined and not easy to separate out. And we must continue to take that into account. And that leads me to believe that we're in for a much longer piece of the problem than we are for a piece of the peace, if I could say it that way.
Yeah. It's been an extraordinary week in your homeland, Thomas, with the presidential debate taking a dramatic turn this week. Democrats now suggesting perhaps that Joe Biden should be replaced. Do you think it will be Joe Biden versus Donald Trump in November?
No, if I know and have listened for years and worked off and on with Senator, Vice President, and now President Biden. And President Biden is not suicidally inclined, nor is he prepared to take a position which could go further to ensure the victory of his current opponent than almost anything else I can think of. People were in shock after the debate, much discussion. Some of that has worn off, but Biden has shown himself in North Carolina to be the opposite of what he was in Atlanta. But I cannot tell you that will continue. But we do need a time for reestablishing the game rules and the assessment of the situation before people jump into actions that may well have a chance of making our situation worse than better.
You, Thomas, have worked at close quarters with, I think I'm right in saying, every president since Richard Nixon. Do you look at Joe Biden now, and perhaps you've even spoken to him and been in his company in the last few years? Do you look at him and think there is a man capable of this high office?
I don't think he's ideal, but he is, in my view, the best person in this particular race to be the next president of the United States.
I see. Okay. And I suppose that's the calculation America has to make, or the Democrats have to make initially, and then America in November. How old is too old to be US president?
I don't think age is a factor. I think mental capacity, physical stamina are the kinds of things that we looked for in the debate. We found, unfortunately, wanting. He's shown some of the ability to recover in North Carolina in the day after. His vice president gave quite a very good defense of his position, something that she hasn't done or been allowed to do. That's beginning to strengthen what I think is a ticket, which is in many ways going to have to do a great deal more to guarantee its capacity to win the next election.
I see. You have had this extraordinary career, Thomas. As I say, you've worked with every president since Richard Nixon. You have been on the front line of some of the most incredible geopolitical stories. We've talked about Israel and we've talked about Russia, El Salvador as well, where you were the US ambassador to, where within, I think, days, weeks of taking the job, you were subject to assassination threats. How do you reflect now on that, the potential danger that you have been in your life?
But I think the potential danger that I've been in comes with the job. And I feel very lucky that those who wished me ill and harm were not successful in carrying out their task. But if you ask me, as I reflect back on a career in which there were elements of deep uncertainty and sometimes serious danger, I would do it all over again.
Who was the best president you ever worked for?
Very, very interesting question. I did not work for President Obama, but thought very highly of him. I thought President Clinton had a remarkable capacity at analyzing politics, understanding situations, knowing his brief, and understanding how and in what way he should deal successfully with foreign leaders. There were other presidents who had also advantageous. I had admiration for Gerald Ford, even though he was an unelected president who filled in for a short period of time. And I think that President Biden has done a very good job under very difficult circumstances, and that his capacities at this stage will have to be demonstrated to the American voting public. I believe that he can do that, and I believe that we are not at the end of any electoral campaign as a result of the debate, but we certainly are not at a certainty with respect to the outcome in either direction.
Okay. I'm going to put you on the spot, Thomas, finally. Because
Please do it. If you haven't done it already, I'm ready.
This is what you live for, isn't it? You live for it. You have seen so many moments of history. You've been, as I say, on the front, the sort of front row seat to history in so many different ways. You will have come across so many stories. If I was to put you on the spot for that one that stands out, that I can't believe I was there and I was in the room and I witnessed it moment, what would that be?
Boy, you asked me a very, very interesting and difficult question. I was at the United Nations at the time Iraq invaded Kuwait. And I had opportunities during that particular period of time, both to make recommendations and to work with the members of the Security Council of the United Nations to do everything I could to be sure that we kept the world community together against the use of aggressive force against a peaceful country, and to authorize when the time came, and certainly with the leadership of President H.W. Bush and Jim Baker as Secretary of State, the use of force that succeeded. Nothing was perfect, but it made a real difference in the world community and how things went ahead. And it was an operation of the United Nations that was foreseen in 45 and mirrored what people believed should be done to deal with aggressors and unprovoked warlike aggression. And my feeling is if we were able to, should find being able to return to that kind of unity in the UN and that kind of cooperation would do a great deal to help us both in Ukraine and Gaza, in Sudan, in Myanmar, and we could go on with all of the messy conflicts that are at the moment threatening international peace and security in serious ways.
Wow, what an extraordinary moment that must have been to see and to be witness. I've got a million extra questions to ask you about that, Thomas, but we're out of time. Maybe another time over a whiskey by an open fire. Would be lovely. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks. Great pleasure to be with you, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much. Thomas Pickering, former US ambassador to Israel, Russia, and the UN, with us on Times Radio. Gosh, it's fascinating, wasn't it?